Dumpling, maybe you can just mention sort of what's been going on with the DAO and maybe also a little merch update as well if possible, especially
Sure.
given it's class related merch.
Yeah. So a lot of good stuff going on with the DAO. I've been starting a lot of conversations with people, onboarding people, and getting kind of an onboarding process going. So that's been pretty fun and exciting. One of these is Austin, our intrepid stenographer here, who's been taking notes for all the meetings. So you guys can check that out. And now the meetings will be recorded, so that's good. Also, people on we have a lot of content production stuff coming up. I've been sort of speaking with and interviewing people, and then connecting them with Publius. So if anyone has interest in working for the DAO or has anything they think they can add, just send me a DM and we'll set up a time we can talk. And that's been really exciting. On the merch end of things, I have ordered 12 hats and a couple of test t-shirts with the PFPs. The hats are just I think everyone kind of saw the logo in the merch section. So the hats are just kind of a generic design. The mugs can either be a generic design or can have your PFP on it. So let me know. We originally said we wanted 30, but and it was the first people who reached out. So right now we have about 10 spoken for. So just go ahead and reach out to me. Send me a DM, say you want it. I'll coordinate with you over email, and then you can let me know what address you want it sent to, and we'll get that done. And then we'll probably do another run of merch afterwards too. So there is a snapshot vote up for me as operations manager, a role I've kind of been taking on, but obviously we want the support of the DAO in that as well. So I don't want to take a role that people don't feel like I'm good for. So looking forward to seeing voting on that. And there's several other snapshot proposals up too. So take a look at that. JWW and Where Have You Been have a snapshot proposal up. Publius can speak to a few more. And we have a DAO meeting on Thursday at 8:30. So feel free to drop in there. About all I got for now.
Awesome. Thank you, Dumpling. What a great update. And it's people like yourselves that are taking the initiative and just stepping up to the plate and starting to add value across the board where it's needed is exactly what we think Beanstalk needs at this stage of the game. So excited to see, a couple of the other people that are here are also people we've been talking to about hopefully getting more involved with the DAO. So, we've given people sort of 5 minutes, so I think it's appropriate to get started with more of a class stuff. So, typically the way we do class is it's similar to an AMA where people can just bring their technical questions, their economic questions, their philosophical questions, and we're happy to answer them. And typically we try to go into detail and give people substantive answers, with, the main difference between this and an AMA being we try to keep in mind that the people here are, largely people that are supporting Beanstalk and are going to take this information and then repeat it to others. And so we want to, have an opportunity where people who are looking to be constructive and help Beanstalk have an opportunity to, ask questions they may even be embarrassed to ask and really start to understand it at a deeper level. So with that in mind, happy to talk about anything and everything. And, per usual, we've got Dumpling up here, or, sometimes the Bean Merchant also pops up here so that we can get sort of general community source questions based on the chatter in the Discord and stuff like that. But in general, people that are here should feel free to raise your hand at any point and we'll get you up here and you can ask your questions. So with that, we'll sort of open up the floor to some questions. What's up, G-Dubs?
Hey guys, still just apparently only jumping up on stage. But Publius, I think one thing that would be great to get your thoughts on a little bit more as we're looking at kind of pegging the price over the course of the past couple of days. We've been sitting below one for a pretty long period of time, which I think is pretty uncommon since the last stat cycle. Um, just given the fact that the pod line is where it's at, we're getting the accumulation of soil, and I'm not sure how much. I haven't seen how many unique sowers that we've had join the protocol over the past, 24 to 72 hours. Could you talk a little bit more on the economics of how the peg will be stabilizing? If we're not getting new sowing happening to the field, et cetera, just to get a better feel of the rebalancing to peg.
Definitely. So there's a couple things that we would look at to sort of understand where the system is at in real time and where things are heading. But before we get into the micro data, it's important to appreciate that at a macro level, Beanstalk issued a ton of debt over the past 2 week growth cycle. And so if we're on the website and we go to field and we go to pods and we go out to like the month view, Beanstalk during the 2 week growth cycle, which lasted, if we go out to the price chart, really from like November, let's call it 16th, is that first spike up to 117, where you started to see more increased minting. We saw from November 17, pod line grow from 100 million now to 360 million. So if we do the math on the implied valuation of Beanstalk and how that has changed over the past 2 weeks, that's an increase in 260 million pods, which implies, not even including the fact that the bean supply doubled, an increase like another 20 million. We're talking about the valuation on the debt side has increased over $500 million to now you're lending at Beanstalk valuing it at $750 million or so. And on the one hand, therefore, it makes a lot of sense that the weather has to readjust again. And even though you saw the weather come down during that spike in demand, it's now started to increase again and is back to sort of its highs. And so this is a natural resetting of the weather that we're experiencing. One thing I do think it's important to comment is one of the main inspirations for BIP6 is that Beanstalk shouldn't increase the debt level by that much during periods of excess demand. And we feel pretty confident that the next time Beanstalk goes through a 1 or 2 week debt growth cycle, like it did over the past 2 weeks, it will deleverage in a much more effective fashion. And at that point in time, we would expect the weather maybe not to have to reset so aggressively, and then maybe we won't see such extended periods of time below $1. But at the same time, at the macro level, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect these types of extended periods of time below $1, especially when A, Beanstalk doesn't have a lot of utility around it at the moment, and B, there aren't a ton of arbitragers playing Beanstalk at $1 yet. And so over the next couple of weeks and months, as Beanstalk continues to oscillate above and below $1 and tighter to $1, we would expect both of those things to change, for there to be an increase in utility and an increase in arbitragers. And that will be when you start to see Beanstalk trade much tighter to the peg, especially on the downside. But candidly, we feel like this is periods of time like this are where Beanstalk actually differentiates itself from other protocols like ESD and Basis that have failed. Because now, when we talk about the micro data, if you go to the balances, the withdrawals and the withdrawn beans are only about 600,000 beans at the moment. Whereas 3 or 4 days ago, as the growth cycle ended, the withdrawals were back over 2 million. And so we've seen sort of a trickle of withdrawals over the past day or two, but that's largely slowed down. And so the main reason economically we would expect to justify the price being below $1 is that simply the weather is not high enough given the recent increase in the pod line. So this is all generally normal and expected behavior, especially after we saw the price as high as $1.40 and really extensive periods above $1.10. It makes sense for the price to hang out. And candidly, we were expecting it to hang out lower than this. So not to give price predictions on where we think it was going to go or where it was going to go per se, explicitly, but we're incredibly enthused by the fact that other than for a couple hours when ETH really was at its low, and even then Beanstalk experienced a high level of demand, price never dipped really below 88 cents. And one other thing to look at to sort of understand where we're at in this mini cycle, even though it does seem like in general things have turned very positive from a network perspective around Beanstalk, is the volume. And there's actually almost no volume over the past couple days with the price below $1. So there was $2 to $3 million of volume every day above $1, and now only 500,000, 900,000, $600,000 of volume a day below $1. And in general, that's also an indication to us that there aren't a lot of sellers below $1. And so, in short, this is largely a function of an absence of sowers because the weather has to increase. And just Beanstalk did experience a major network effect over the past 2 weeks, and it's both healthy and expected for there to be a little cool off. And um, this is very much normal behavior.
So that was fantastic. Thank you. So then just to follow it up, I mean, you're thinking then like as the weather increases, obviously it's going to be more appetizing for potential sowers to come in despite the length of the pod line. And then in turn, that's going to be one larger push of how we're going to head trend more towards the peg.
Correct. And, separately, just to give a little context, Beanstalk is right now like less than 100 ETH from the peg. And in comparison, just to talk about sort of where we were in the past, during the last debt cycle, Beanstalk was hundreds of ETH below the peg, and the liquidity was a fraction of what it is right now. And so when we consider the general health of the system, we saw one investor put in over 220 ETH within a day. If one investor did that, not only would we be back above peg, we would be immediately back in that sort of growth cycle that we were in 2 weeks ago. So frankly, we don't want there to be $1 million to come in and then that growth cycle, and then immediately after, and then immediately after. That is how you get endless growth that certainly before BIP 6 wouldn't have been positive. And even going forward, we still feel it's very healthy to have these short-term cool-offs where the system is able to reset, and it's evident that there is a stable price and a clearing at $1 around a 40-something million in supply, and that's meaningful data. And then at some point, the market should start to grow again from there. So this is all part of the process ultimately as Beanstalk starts to demonstrate that time below peg is going to get less and less over time. So when the white paper tries to be very open about this, the oscillations, especially at the beginning when there's no arbitragers, are going to be wider and more violent. So this is natural, and the only thing that will ultimately bring in arbs is the fact that Beanstalk does regularly cross beans over its peg. So the past couple days, just the market repricing itself, and we think it's pretty healthy. And the thing that we would look at to indicate that things are generally pretty healthy is that the withdrawals have continued to stay relatively low in comparison to what they were when there were major outflows a couple days ago that ended the growth cycle.
Great, thank you.
Bean Boy, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have a bunch of questions, but the one I've been thinking about is, let's say someone sows like I don't know, like $1 million versus someone who sowed like 1 million beans versus someone who sows like 100 beans. What does the 1 million beans like cause like a blocking effect in the system when it comes to sort of clearing the line? Like, does the pod line get cleared like one bean at a time, or like does an entire batch have to be cleared at once?
It's on a continuous basis, so it's not an entire plot, and um, pods. It's not even a whole plot, a whole pod. It's to the decimal. So, um, that's the short answer. It's a continuous harvest.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I mean, I have like other questions, but if anyone else wants to go.
So Bean Boy, I think the answer would be yeah. If the million beans is right before you and you're the 100 beans, you have to wait for the whole million to go through until yours goes through. But it's it's really the fairest way, right? Otherwise, it'd get really complicated. I think. Go ahead and ask one more, Bean Boy, and then we'll get to Gallo.
Yeah, so I was just I guess like I was reading the white paper and I saw some stuff about like the seasons of plenty dynamic. Is that something that happens often? It has something to do with the like debt ratio, right?
So the seasons of plenty happen not regularly, but when they do, they tend to happen a couple times in a row. So there was only really one week where there were seasons of plenty, and that was Beanstalk was pumped from like a $2 million, $2.5 million market cap to a $40 million market cap, and grew to a 25 million bean supply over like a week. And that if you look at the all-time price chart, those seasons of plenty happened when we went from $4 right back to one. And then there was like consecutive seasons of plenty almost entirely through like the next couple days, except for there was one season where there was a price below one, and that's then when you saw the price sort of pump for a couple more hours. So, in short, the season of plenty is triggered by 24 seasons of rain, and it is raining on the bean farm when the price is greater than one and the debt level is less than excessively low, which currently is 5%. So the bean, if there was like less than 2 million pods in the pod line, and the price was greater than one based on the current bean supply, then it would be raining. And if it rained for 24 consecutive seasons, there would be a season of plenty. And that is effectively Beanstalk's way of deleveraging during periods where it might be particularly susceptible to apes trying to pump it, because a low debt level means that the silo return is going to get particularly juicy. So the season of plenty makes it unattractive for anyone to buy and deposit beans while it's raining.
Oh, interesting. So it's not meant as like a general reward thing. It's kind of like a safety rail then for the price, right?
Exactly right. It's like an emergency deleveraging valve in instances where there's way too much demand for beans.
Yeah, all right. That makes sense.
We would just note that it did work incredibly effectively during the pump and dump, and were it not for that, Beanstalk would certainly not be around today.
Publius, on that note, I think so. Then, if you were to change, the withdrawal period of 24 hours, which I thought was something that came up during the AMA, but maybe I misunderstood, of withdrawals from the silo to a 24-hour period, would that then impact the season of plenty, or maybe I misunderstood?
As the withdrawal time comes down, that would have to also impact the season of plenty timer. Correct.
Okay.
So
Gallo.
just for reference, just for completion, and then Gallo, go ahead, is the season of plenty timer of 24 seasons of rain is at the current upper limit, which is the withdrawal time. So the season of plenty timer can be 8 seasons of rain or 16 seasons of rain. It just has to be less than or equal to the withdrawal timer. And the reason for that is it basically prevents just straight arb bots from from participating in inorganically pumping Beanstalk when the price is greater than 1, because it basically means that they cannot withdraw and sell above 1, and so there's no opportunity for them to buy above 1, deposit, collect interest, and sell above 1. So instead, they like implicitly, you know that you're going to have to sell below 1 because it'll happen after the season of plenty, and therefore it's a much less attractive to just our Beanstalk. So all of this is designed to limit the amount of inorganic demand Beanstalk experiences when the price is greater than 1 and the debt level is low. Because again, Beanstalk doesn't want people that just want to pump it. Beanstalk wants long-term investors and long-term sowers, and it doesn't. People that are just going to pump and dump Beanstalk are not people like that's not capital Beanstalk wants to attract. So these are incentive mechanisms designed to disincentivize sort of ape capital.
Sorry, just on that note, then what would be the incentive of reducing the withdrawal timer below the 24 hours?
Well, the point is that we would have to lower the season of plenty timer in line with that. So as the withdrawal time comes down, so too will the season of plenty timer. So like if one thing that we're currently working on a bib that one of the things the bib will do is lower the withdrawal time and it'll lower it over time, right? So maybe like twice a week, it'll lower it by 1 season, a couple weeks, down to something like 12 or 16 seasons. And then every week, it'll lower it another season down to 4 or something. And then from there, the point is the season of plenty timer would just have to decrease in tandem down to 4. And then I think any further decrease in withdrawal time below 4 seasons would require some additional tweaks to the silo incentives. But in order to get Beanstalk down to either 1 season, meaning you could withdraw at the beginning of the next season, or no withdrawal timer at all, we are considering further minor tweaks to the behavioral incentives here. And again, as Beanstalk grows, it does allow us a little bit more opportunity to adjust the mechanism here. Whereas when Beanstalk was in its infantile state, having a strict withdrawal time of 24 seasons was much more meaningful than when Beanstalk is operating at scale. So lowering the withdrawal time over the next couple months gradually will increase utility while Beanstalk continues to grow and demonstrate itself. So there's less of a need for strict rules on that front. And just lastly, before we let you go ahead, Gallo, we would comment that when Stalk and Seeds become tradable, that will also increase the stickiness of deposits in the silo, and that will also further allow or further reduce the friction when it comes to decreasing the withdrawal timer. So lots of interrelated things happening here, but they're all generally with happening in mind with how can we answering the question of how do we increase utility and how can we keep increasing stability while increasing utility. So enough said on that front for now. So Gallo, sorry to make you wait so long, but go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So I've been thinking about like the pod line being large and the time that you have to wait to get your return, right? Not bounded. And I was thinking like if you considered making the pod line the returns for people that are in the pod line being not like you have to wait for your turn to get everything, but more like a continuous return. So if you're in front of the line, you get more, and if you're at the end of the line, you get less. But everybody gets something, so that everybody feels like they're getting a little bit of return, and it's a little less intimidating to go in and thinking that maybe you're gonna wait for a year or two, right, to get your investment back.
So totally
yeah.
understand.
So and then at the same, would you
Go
consider?
ahead.
Did you think about this design approach, and would you consider a proposal along those lines?
So in general, one of the philosophical principles around the creation of both the silo and the field is how do we create efficient markets? How do we create an efficient market for soil? And how do we create an efficient market for beans? And one of the main innovations of Beanstalk is the first in, first out payment model. And not to say that it's we have to keep it because it's an innovation, but just to kind of juxtapose your proposal against the first in, first out mechanism and how it may have different incentives or different effects on investor behavior than desired is currently if I'm going to lend beans to Beanstalk under the first in, first out mechanism, I can price the debt very specifically because I know what I'm valuing Beanstalk at when I get paid off. There's an implied market cap of what the value of Beanstalk is when I'm getting paid off. So I know my return and I can form some sort of calculation of the risk of what is the chances that Beanstalk never gets to that size. And that's a pretty simple calculation. Frankly, when you also add on to that the fact that the growth of the pod line is somewhat continuous, meaning every person is lending after somebody else. So if I'm lending right now at a given price, I'm lending it very close to the last price that the last person lent Beanstalk. And so when you those two together and then you combine it with the first in, first out harvest schedule, what you create is a series of incentives that basically make it efficient behavior such that if I think that right now, based on the current weather, the current price of beans, and the current length of the pod line, I think it's a good time to lend to Beanstalk. I am incentivized to do that immediately. Again, when we talk about creating an efficient market, that's the important part, that I'm incentivized to do it immediately. Whereas a harvest schedule where pods harvest at all points in the line, but harvest at a different rate, makes it basically impossible to calculate what your actual return and how over what period of time you can expect to get that return. Because one of the main things that will influence your return is how many other people lend to Beanstalk and how quickly the pod line grows. And that's already a similar dynamic to the silo, and we don't want the field and the silo to have exactly the same dynamics. But furthermore, the nature of the silo makes it so that the rate at which your return in the silo is getting diluted is much less than in a scenario where as the weather increases and the pods at the end of the line per bean sown are increasing, now you have like very perverse incentives for people that lent earlier are sort of getting screwed because the weather is starting to increase, and therefore people that are lending less money to Beanstalk later on, which again is worse behavior than people lending more money to Beanstalk earlier at a lower weather, are starting to get a disproportionate return. And so as soon as you start to price pod harvests based on your place in line, now that factors into the weather in two places, and you start to lose the effect of the first in, first out harvest schedule and its creation of an efficient market. So when we think about how Beanstalk succeeds and how it actually creates an efficient price discovery on the bean and soil markets, changes to the pod harvest schedule away from first in, first out. Not to say that we're intent on sticking to it, but I think it would be very hard to create a system that would create a more efficient market around soil in general.
Thank you. No, that's
Or at least specific, not to say that it's difficult to create a more efficient market around soil. We're always trying to do that. I just don't think that this solution is going to achieve that. Just to be clear, like we don't think current model is the best it can be. We're always trying to improve it further.
Also, Gallo, just in thinking about that, the exact reason why you're not lending, why you're saying why you're having some doubts about lending to Beanstalk is is just because it's upfront about how long it's going to be. You know, if under your way, it's a little more opaque, right? Like if you think, oh, I'll get a little bit, but then I'll get a little bit later, and I'm not really sure how much I'll get. We don't want people lending to the protocol who don't really understand. You know, that seems like that could cause problems just with that. You know, we want to be clear about, you know, how many pods have to clear until you get paid, and that way people can make a rational decision, right?
Yeah, no, I
One other.
understand. I was just wondering, like, what were the
Go ahead.
trade-offs? And yeah, because it's just that, I did lend to Bean, and I already harvested, and I have more coming. But right now, when I look at the line, I'm intimidated, right? Because it can take a year, it can take 2 years, and it's like I'm not sure exactly how to measure that time, and I think that's something that might be a common problem, right? People are looking at it and say, "Hey, how long is this gonna take, right? How can I measure this?"
One other thing we would just add is that the type of exposure that you're describing, turning the field into is almost exactly the silo. And people buying beans below $1 and depositing in the silo is better for them than buying them above $1 and depositing them in the silo, because you get stock and seeds based on the beans you deposit. So for every US dollar of value you deposit into Beanstalk, like it's better to deposit below 1. And therefore there are similar incentives around, you know, you have better returns when the price is below and to deposit in the silo. So if you're looking for that type of exposure where you get interest every season, that's already available, and depositing beans in the silo has the same effect on the price in the short term as does sowing beans. So to some extent that mechanism is already a part of Beanstalk.
Okay, Bean Billionaire, you're up next.
Yeah. Hi. Publius, I've heard you talk before about how long-term growth needs to come from demand for Bean's utility as a stablecoin. I'm wondering if there's a risk of a sort of chicken and egg problem where Beanstalk needs that external demand to achieve price stability, but also needs to maintain price stability to generate that external demand, and kind of how long can Beanstalk sort of balance supply and demand today, kind of using only weather without that utility? Or how do we resolve that kind of chicken egg problem in getting people to use Bean as a stablecoin?
That is the chicken and the egg problem, and we're not shying away from it. And candidly, there have been a couple other chicken and the egg problems around Beanstalk, which somehow there are now chickens and eggs, and one of them is reflected by the fact that there are 30 people in this class. Yeah, more than that, 37, 36 people in this class right now talking about Beanstalk. And when we started, we were like, how do we get people to care about Beanstalk without just going to VCs and trying to, we wanted to bootstrap a real community. How do we do that? And it's, it's been a lot of work, but in general, if you ask how we're going to make that happen, the short answer is Beanstalk Farms is growing aggressively. So Dumpling is now, hopefully going to be operations manager. Austin is joining the team in a part-time capacity. We're hoping to grow that over time. There's lots of developers now joining Beanstalk Farms across the stack that are going to allow, as we have, integrations organized with various protocols, that coded up in an efficient fashion across the stack. George B, is leading a lot of business development, and he's going to hopefully take on a further increased role going forward. So there's a lot of work that is happening to start to do that, but the short answer is there's a lot more work that needs to happen. And specifically, it's not so trivial, especially in the early days, to make sure that the integrations that we are focusing on specifically, not to say that it's, any integration isn't great right now. That's like anyone should who wants to start using Beans, we encourage them to. But specifically, when we talk about the integrations we want to focus on the Beanstalk Farms level, it's essential that they are symbiotic to Beanstalk and create a utility. And so it's not just that Beanstalk can help, a protocol in the short term. It's that the underlying dynamics of the protocols we're integrating with are not going to be short-term demand and then large chunks of supply coming due, at least in the short term, right? Like over time, as there are larger arbitragers and a much more efficient market for soil, I think that changes, and the amount of different integrations Beanstalk can support goes up dramatically. But in the short term, uh, a little bit of an art and a little bit of science. And we've been talking to community members like Mr. Manifold about and McBeanolds and others about uh, curve integrations and the like, and how that would work and how to structure them such that they have symbiotic effects on Beanstalk and aren't just helping another protocol. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to help Curve at this size, but we have a lot that we think would benefit Beanstalk by starting to integrate with Curve. And I think once we have a Curve pool, even if it's unincentivized, you're going to see a lot less periods of time with the price significantly below one, just because of the ability to arbitrage against the Curve pool. So this is all very exciting, but there is a lot of work to be done on that front. And in general, we would say uh, your question is a question on our minds and on everyone's minds, and we're spending a lot of time trying to figure it out and start to get those live, and we're having a lot of those conversations. And we would just encourage everyone, if they think of other integrations or protocols that might want to start using Beans, uh, to connect us. And in general, just sort of one last point is, over the next month, like we're sort of considering December like infrastructure month on Beanstalk Farms. We're trying to get the hiring process set up. We're trying to get the onboarding process set up. That's another thing that we can start to get set up, is this infrastructure around creating utility and getting other protocols to integrate Beanstalk and making that very simple for them. So lots of different stuff we can start to do, make that smoother and easier. But in general, you're totally right that step one is getting Beanstalk to continue to oscillate above $1 and below $1. And at 93 cents, it's a little bit of a harder pitch than at $1 at $1.03. But candidly, we still feel like it's a very compelling pitch, even at 93 cents or around here for sure.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the answer.
We would just comment, like, ESD and the like have never had these extended periods below $1 that they return from. And the fact that Beanstalk was, as low as 24 cents and spent a month basically entirely below $1, but there's no history with any of those other stable attempts, algo stable attempts, anything like that. And this little dip over the past week is nothing but a fuel for the fire of proof of the concept of the model, and we're very excited. So whenever the weather does rise to the appropriate level to attract sufficient demand for soil such that the price goes back above $1, we think it's just going to be back in action, and hopefully with the soil changes from BIP6, Beanstalk will deleverage much more effectively. What's up, Evan?
Hey, so interesting discussions so far, and I kind of have a two-part question depending on how you answer the first part. So my first part is, do arbitrage?
We like that. That's a good. It's a conditional question.
Yeah. So do arbitrage opportunities currently exist for when Bean is below peg and when debt levels are excessively high? Because my understanding from the white paper is that as long as the debt levels are not excessively high, the pods essentially act as an arbitrage, a delayed arbitrage where you get paid out in the credit. But given that the pod levels are so high, it no longer it doesn't seem to be functioning. It doesn't seem to like be able to function as that kind of arbitrage that I was originally thinking.
So demand for soil is not arbitrage, as defined in the white paper. And we don't really explicitly define arbitrage, I guess, in the white paper, but you would think about, the way we would think about it is, right now the price is at 93 cents. Anyone who wants to start doing bean arb has a reasonable expectation that, they're monitoring the system. They realize right now for $1 million or so, like, you can basically put Beanstalk back in a growth cycle. And for $1.5 million, almost definitely, because there's just not that much supply at the moment. And the point is, the arb opportunity right now is to buy beans below $1. And then as the growth cycle starts to start, you sell beans above $1. And so the arbitrage opportunity is to buy low and sell high. That arbitrage opportunity is distinct from the actual mechanism that Beanstalk uses to return the price to $1. But we would note that, like, the main point of highlighting arbitragers in the white paper is specifically that all Beanstalk can do is cause like large oscillations above and below $1. It's very difficult to have a mechanism like this that is able to by itself return the price to $1 every season. When you have periods where there's excess supply and there's just not enough demand at that marginal supply at $1, you're going to have periods of time where the price is below $1. The way that those periods of time decrease and those oscillations come to basically zero for most periods of time is when arbitragers look at Beanstalk and say, yeah, like, looks like it's going to be back above $1 at some point in the next week to 2 weeks. I can buy it up to $1 with an average price of 96 cents, and hopefully I can sell it at an average price of $1.02. Therefore, I'm turning, an 8 or 9% profit in a week or two. So running that arbitrage back and forth above and below $1 is what will ultimately create that stability. And lots of people running that arbitrage above and below $1 is what will create a competitive market for bean stability. And over time, that's what will then allow the mechanism to start to work in a more efficient fashion as well. But we would note that the mechanism is much more of a reactive, slow and steady response to the market, mainly so that Beanstalk cannot be easily manipulated. And largely it relies on arbitragers that are just independent market participants to buy and sell beans back to $1 in order to make their own profit, but also helping Beanstalk at the same time.
Okay. Cool. And then so the second part of my question, I guess, is then since there isn't that kind of a hard arbitrage opportunity and the oscillations of the peg is dependent on the growth of the or like these arbitragers to come in and to buy bean in hopes of the arbitrage to be successful, it doesn't seem like you seem too concerned that there just isn't going to be any more arbitragers coming, because certainly
There's
collateral.
a difference between lenders and arbitragers, right? So at the current weather and pod line, there aren't a lot of lenders. But once the weather rises to attract lenders, then it doesn't matter whether or not there are arbitragers. Like, lenders are distinct actors than arbitragers, or they may be the same actor, but from an economic perspective, you would consider their behavior differently. And right now, Beanstalk is ripe for arbitrage of the type that we described, where you can buy it at 93 cents up to $1 for an average price of below 97 cents. 96.71 would be your average price. And we're basically now saying when the price is above $1, you can then take those beans and sell them above $1. So now you're collecting the spread between buying them below $1 and selling them above $1. That's live right now. The absence of arbitragers doing that is why we have a period of time where the price is below $1, but that is separate from the absence of lenders, which is another reason why beans is below $1 at the moment. So there's an absence of arbitragers and an absence of lenders, and the presence of either arbitragers or lenders would bring the price back to $1.
Okay. Yeah. And so the absence of lenders kind of is a result of the pod line being so long, and so the weather is supposed to increase the APY of the pod line and incentivize more people to go in. I'm not so I guess I understand that portion. It's the arbitrage portion. It's the kind of the spontaneous, the arbitragers will come and they will see an opportunity and they will decide that this is a good arbitrage play and that the price of bean is going to go eventually up. And it's very impressive that the price of bean was able to rebound after that huge dip and those multiple, just all of those dips towards the end of September, beginning middle of October, and to be able to maintain the peg, and that was a result of arbitragers coming in, I guess. And
that was the result of lenders. Just to be clear, that was
okay.
almost all lenders, and that's why. So just a great chart. If you go to field and you go to sowers and you go to all time, if you look at how Beanstalk actually recovered from mid-September to middle of October, like 400 individual lenders or unique wallets lent to Beanstalk. And so it was the ability to attract a diverse set of lenders that led to the price returning to 1. And if you look at where we're at just over the past week or so in this chart, there haven't been a lot of new lenders. And that's one of the main reasons why the price now has below 1 is because there aren't a lot of lenders at the current weather, which is fine. So accordingly, Beanstalk has started to raise the weather again.
And the arbitragers, like, I understand the protocol can only really focus on the lending portion, but I guess the arbitragers will just kind of come in and, because I'm just, I guess my concern is that
Exactly.
the weather and the pods, that doesn't become sustainable in people's minds, and they don't really see that as an option, and so then the only option left is the arbitrage. And so I guess they're just gonna come in from whatever, and from like the community growing and putting more outreach out to other communities, and explaining what this is, because a lot of people don't even know, let alone that this exists. People don't even understand how all of it works because it's so entirely new. And so I guess the arbitragers will just kind of come in spontaneously.
So over time, as Beanstalk continues to oscillate above and below $1, that will hopefully be the inspiration for some people to start performing that arbitrage. So there's no saying how many more times Beanstalk needs to run above and below $1, but at some point you would expect that to happen, and then from there, beans are going to be much more stable. But candidly, once that happens, whenever you run out of arb money and there's too many sellers, and then you have a dip below 1 for the first time in a while, like, it's times like these where Beanstalk has lived through periods where you have a price below $1 that makes this long-term sustainable.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
This is, I get it. A lot of people are new, and it might be a little nerve-wracking, like we haven't printed in a couple days. What's going on? Is this okay? This is all very healthy. Now, we try to be as open and honest about missteps as well, and so we would comment that if BIP 6 had been implemented a month ago, before the Beanstalk really started to grow and have periods above 1, the pod line would be probably 120 million or so maximum. So hopefully going forward, there will be much less growth in the pod line during periods of excess demand for soil. So that was largely just an inefficiency in the model, and we're seeing that reflected in a slight deviation in the price below $1 now because the weather has to increase. But again, in the long run, we think this is probably very healthy for Beanstalk regardless. Not to say that it's not good that it was fixed.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense now. Thanks.
Bliss, I have a question for you.
Shoot.
If you like, given the length of the pod line, and like with the length of the pod line, do you have an anticipation, like say 6 months from now, where As far as a percentage of, the amount of beans out there versus the length of the pod line, do you have an idea of, where you would like it to be as far as like how much debt you'd like Beanstalk to have as a
Yes.
percentage of its market cap?
Yeah. So, I mean, currently those are explicitly defined as like the optimal debt level, which is 15%. But based on the current pod line, of 360 million, that sort of implies a really high valuation of Beanstalk. When we might have like a below optimal pod line or pod rate, which is perfectly fine. But keeping in mind, like the next 6 months or so, you would basically say that hopefully over the next couple weeks and months, as Beanstalk continues to go through, its growth cycle, and we start to see that play out more, and the effects of BIP6 take place where the pod line isn't growing, uh, once we have no available soil, we should see the pod rate start to come down aggressively. So maybe we get to like a 500 or 700 million pod line, but that should happen as Beanstalk rose to a couple $100 million as well. And so you're going to see the pod rate come down into the low hundreds over time, and then from there, at some point you will start to see Beanstalk enter like a further growth cycle from there and really pop, largely due to the fact that it has paid off most of its debt. At that point, you would maybe, it's hard to say whether we'll see a reset of the pod line to zero, which would be sort of crazy. But I mean, candidly, guys, all of this is going to play out over the next year, regardless. Like, there's no scenario in which Beanstalk isn't chugging through all the pods and it's still alive in a year. So just based on the speed that crypto moves and the rate that Beanstalk is growing, like all of this is going to play out in the next 6 months to a year. And even if you're lending to Beanstalk right now, this is not, people are talking about 2-3 years down the road. There's no way that Beanstalk exists in 3 years if it hasn't paid off all these pods, in the next couple months, which again, I think it's very doable. Like this is the next 6 months, Beanstalk should definitely be 1 billion plus beans. So this is why we're talking about integrations and stuff so seriously, because we do want to start to increase utility and not be a project that has 1 billion beans that are all $1 and no one wants to use them. So this is an important part of the process.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Alrighty. What else do we have? Okay.
Wait, can I just ask one quick question again?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to follow up on the harvestable pod portion, I think just to really tease out the final details on that. So, Publius, let's say I have 10K in harvestable pod and Dumpling has 100K, and I put mine in just before him. It sounds like the pods become harvestable like down to the decimal, but it won't be the case that I can harvest my full plot of 10K pods until the entire plot is accessible, correct?
No, that's also not correct. So if like you have a 10K plot and half of it harvests, you can harvest them and then you'll just have a remaining plot with the other 5K.
Right, thanks. And then obviously, since Dumpling's still behind me, he's gonna have to wait till all those 10K, and then I get mine, and he'll start to get his. Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Correct. The main point here is, and especially like one of the things we're working on for BIP7, which we'll put a draft of a proposal at some point once we have it more fully fleshed out. But one of the things we intend to include is partial claims. So even if you have like larger plots and some like half of it is claimable or harvestable, you don't have to sow all of it, or you don't have to LP all of it. You can do parts, and you have much more customizability as well.
I think Snake should go because I already asked a question. I'm just up here again because I thought no one else had any questions, but he should go first.
Sure. Go ahead, Snake.
What a friendly environment. What a friendly
you.
environment, guys. This is awesome. Love it.
Thank you. And sorry if it's been asked. So can someone effectively like hold up the pod line if they want to?
No. So the pods harvest independent of whether the people in front of you have harvested their pods, if that makes sense. So there's no way to hold up the pod line.
Perfectly clear. Thank you.
So you mentioned a little towards the beginning about how some new developers have come on board, and that I think you were working on making the integration process easier. And I was kind of curious if you could shed some more light on what the, from a technical perspective, how can you make the integrations easier, and how does that look for partnerships as well? I mean, obviously that's good for potential partnerships, because like Olympus Pro, for example, they've had in the third 90 days that they have been serviced, they have been able to have a partnership with a new protocol on average once every 3 days. And so, do you see Bean able to have that kind of infrastructure to pump out integrations like that in the next like 6 months, I guess?
Hopefully, definitely. So where things get particularly interesting and complex, but also get exciting as fuck. Sorry, we shouldn't curse, but that just shows how excited we are about this stuff. Is it slipped out? Is when stock and seeds become liquid and tradable. Those are the assets that become really interesting for people to incorporate in other protocols because they are yield like bearing assets. And accordingly, once stock and seeds get incorporated into other protocols, bean deposits get really sticky, independent of how low the withdrawal timer is. And so the complication around stock and seeds becoming liquid, though, is if I want to like add my stock to a lending pool, for example, the way Beanstalk distributes rewards is that if I have seeds in that in a lending pool, that lending pool will start to accrue my stock. That lending pool, when it accrues my stock, then will start to accrue my beans that I earn from stock as well. Well, that those seeds won't, like, you'll have to farm your stock, right? Because it's grown stock. But the point is, you're now receiving these assets that you would be entitled to if they were your seeds. But while they're sitting in a lending protocol, nobody owns them. Or technically, it would be owned, like the way Beanstalk considers it is that it would be owned by the lending protocol contract with which you've deposited your seeds in. And so what we want to do is we want to make it really easy for lending protocols to integrate stock and seeds, for example, by giving them sort of factory contracts to deploy to handle, like basically allowing people to go through this contract, which will do the accounting for the distribution of beans, stock, and seeds as appropriate, even while you're integrating with other smart contracts. So that's really where the complications are introduced, and where having like a robust development infrastructure to make it trivial for any project to integrate stock and seeds, stuff like that is what might be a little more technically challenging. And over the next couple months, we hope to get ready as we prepare for stock and seeds to become liquid. Again, that's something that we could do over the next couple weeks. If anything, it's sort of like a real trick up Beanstalk's sleeve. And we feel like once stock and seeds go liquid, things are going to start to be much, much more sticky, real, stable. Like it's going to look like much more of a complex ecosystem. And so, on the one hand, you might say, like, let's just get that running ASAP. But on the other hand, because the stock and seeds are going to trade against bean, until we have real utility for bean, you don't really have a major dampening effect from stock and seeds, other than its effect on withdrawals and stickiness in the silos. So again, chicken and the egg, but we're excited about how Stalk and Seeds are going to add value to the ecosystem.
So if you have a curve pool technically and it's not incentivized, is it still is a stock still growing in that then?
Well, no, because currently the only way that you can earn stock on liquidity is if you deposit a Uniswap LP token in the silo. And if the curve pool, like we're thinking that the way we'll probably incentivize a curve pool is with Gauge. We don't need to at least immediately have it so that you can deposit the LP tokens for the Bean3 curve pool in the silo. That's something that can be added in the future if necessary. But we think through things like Vodium, and we've been talking to like McBeanolds about stuff like this for guidance. We think that there are much more cost-effective ways to have liquidity added to the curve pool.
Okay, cool.
So, I was just wondering, you mentioned Stalk and Seed being liquid. Is that like an upcoming BIP or like
Yeah.
I know this was mentioned before, so I was just wondering like what the status on that
It's
was.
not like it's not in the oven, but it's it's the dough is rising in the fridge or something.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Because BIPs are like the code is basically done and it's like a GitHub pull request, right?
Exactly. So BIPs are formal, like actual requests and changes to the code that we want to make. And then typically what we've been doing, especially for the past couple BIPs, is we've been making proposals or drafts of the BIP proposal, which is a written version of the BIP, informally a couple days before for some comments and feedback. Stalk and Seeds, before we even get to like making a proposal, you have to work out the economics of it and then the technical details. Then you have to actually write the code. So we're sort of at the stage on the Stalk and Seeds front where we feel like we've worked out the economic details, and especially now that the Beanstalk Farms development capabilities on the back end have really started to grow. Hopefully, in the next couple weeks, we'll start to be able to devote some resources to working on making Stalk and Seeds liquid, and then our hope is to get more of these BIPs developed in advance, and then be able to sort of deploy them at the appropriate time and have them ready in advance. Whereas to date, we've been sort of writing them in real time, and then once they're ready to go, we propose them. So this is all becoming a little bit more organized, and there's more of a process getting set up across the board, across the stack, across the farm here. Every axis you want to think about it. We're like I said, December is a little bit of infrastructure week, so all just getting started, and we're very encouraged by the progress thus far. So don't want to keep everyone too long. So we've been going basically an hour since we started. If there's any sort of final lingering questions, feel free to chime in, and otherwise, thank you everyone for coming, and we look forward to to continuing the discussion in the Discord and in class next week and elsewhere.
Hey, Publius, I have a quick follow-up on liquid stock specifically. I'm curious how that plays in with governance rights and what implications that has.
Yeah, this is another thing, like when I have my stock and I have it out in a lending protocol, unless it's being loaned out, can I still vote? Right? These are part of the integrations that we want to have a factory contract that makes that stuff very easy to do. And that's part of the process that we need to implement on the technical side of things. But in general, stock being liquid will not affect your ability to vote unless you like sell your stock, or if you deposit it in another smart contract. If that smart contract has an integrated Beanstalk, then you won't be able to vote. And so that's why it's so important for us to have like easy factory contracts that allow people to integrate Stalk and Seeds into their protocols.
So I guess like one last question is, if I'm not mistaken, you basically forfeit Stalk and Seed that accrue in the silo if you withdraw beans, right?
Correct.
So if you were to be able to like give all of your stock to a lending protocol, you would be unable to withdraw beans, or like,
Exactly. You
okay,
like once that's currently, it's just at the protocol level, like it's just an internal state. Like your wallet has an internal state. You just have to earn the appropriate amount of stock and seeds, and that's updated. Whereas when those are liquid, if you don't have the sufficient amount of stock and seeds and silo beans to burn for your withdrawal, you just won't be able to withdraw. You'll have to go on the open market and buy it or get them somehow.
okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm personally very excited for the. I guess I feel like there's going to be a lot of very complicated like economic tricks you can pull if stock and seeds are liquid. Like,
Oh yeah.
for example, stockpiling like a huge quantity of seeds just to like farm stock really fast or something.
There are so many fun things that open up. Like frankly, one of the beauties of this, it's complex, but it's also like a very nice ecosystem when it's functioning in its full capacity. It allows for people to get exactly the type of exposure that they want to the protocol, and it also allows for like unique new complex derivatives to be built on top of Beanstalk, and that is what allows it to become the basis of all of DeFi. Whereas something like Fey and Frax are not meant for that. They can't handle like large derivatives built on top. Beanstalk can, because of like when you have a liquid market of stock and seeds, and you don't just have derivatives built on top of beans, you have them for stock and seeds. You're going to have like really sophisticated arbitragers managing these assets and markets in a way that creates real stability over long periods of time. And then at the micro level, the hope is that the weather is able to adjust during periods where there isn't a sufficient arb to create those longer term oscillations above and below one. So this is this is a very young ecosystem. Again, Beanstalk is still in what we would describe as an infantile state or an infant state, and uh, there's a lot of puberty is a long way away even, and that's going to be a fun period of time. So it's like this thing has so much room to grow, and we're just excited. You talk about the complex economics problems, like we feel so lucky to wake up every day and get to work on those complex economic problems. So we're having a blast, and we're incredibly grateful for active community that's forming around Beanstalk.
Okay, well, I think that's a nice wrap. If there are no lingering questions, I checked the classroom board, and no one had really written any questions there either. So, anyone who's interested, I was going to start a Twitter Spaces so we can hop on there and have a quick chat. I will also note that we just had one of the biggest trades on the NFTs. Someone bought a cool diamond bean for 0.694 ETH, which is about $3,000. So that's pretty cool.
Whoa, that's a steal. One of them went for like an ETH a couple days ago. I didn't. That's cool.
That was a duo package a couple days ago. So you got two
Yeah,
with
but
that
you
one.
got to assume it's for the diamond, right?
Yeah, but it's pretty cool to see. Yeah, that one was a steal.
Wow,
I
fun
need to
stuff.
I need to get my NFTs out of the protocol. I have 7 sitting in there, but I like gas is just like $300 to get them out.
Gotta send it like middle of the night.
Yeah, you can do an email alert when gas is low. Do it. Like ETH gas station.
Oh,
All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming out. We have the DAO meeting on Thursday at 8:30. So please come there. And yeah, if you're at all interested in working for Beanstalk, shoot me a DM and we'll set up a time. We'll chat, figure out a good spot for you. So.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks,